You are standing in the middle of a dense, primeval forest, and you notice something remarkably unremarkable. The air smells like damp pine needles and wet stone. There is no stench. There is no lingering odor of the 25 people you've been traveling with for the last 3 weeks. You realize, with a start, that in this world of 50,000 years ago, you are the cleanest thing in the landscape, despite never having seen a bar of soap. But here is the paradox. You are currently squatting in the dark, 30 yards from your campfire, feeling the cold air on your skin and realizing that this simple, mundane act of biology is the most dangerous thing you will do all day. You are vulnerable, you are exposed, and you are currently providing a scent trail for every predator within 5 miles. You aren't just answering a call of nature, you are playing a high-stakes game of biological hide-and-seek where the loser ends up as a leopard's midnight snack. This is the reality of the ancient bathroom, and it turns out, the way we handled this one basic need is exactly why we survived long enough to invent the flushing toilet. We didn't survive because we were clean. We survived because we were fast, smart, and deeply, evolutionarily disgusted. Most people imagine ancient humans living in a state of perpetual filth, wading through their own refuse like animals in a neglected pen. It is a comforting thought because it makes our modern plumbing feel like a moral triumph. But the reality is exactly the opposite. For nearly 99% of human history, the bathroom was a moving target, and that was its greatest strength. As a nomad, your waste disposal system was the landscape itself. You moved and the problem stayed behind. This creates the first great myth of human history, that the agricultural revolution was a step up in hygiene. In truth, the moment we stopped moving was the moment we began to drown in our own biology. Before the first permanent house was ever built, humans had already perfected a system of sanitation that was more effective than anything seen in the Victorian era. It was a system built on a single, invisible boundary that every member of the tribe understood without ever being told. This boundary wasn't a wall or a fence, it was a sensory threshold. To understand how ancient humans managed their waste, you have to understand the evolutionary architecture of the human nose. We often think of disgust as a social construct, a polite habit taught by parents. But researchers like Dr. Valerie Curtis at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine have shown that the ick factor is actually a sophisticated piece of biological software. In a landmark 2004 study involving over 40,000 participants worldwide, Curtis found that the reaction to fecal matter was universally the strongest disgust trigger across every culture, age group, and environment. Why didn't this universal repulsion kill us off by making us too ashamed to function? Because it acted as a survival compass. For an ancient hunter-gatherer, the invisible boundary was simple. If you can smell the camp's waste, you are standing in the kill zone. This boundary worked because our ancestors were the ultimate flushers, not because they had pipes, but because they had legs. A band of 30 people moving through the savanna or the tundra leaves behind a negligible biological footprint. The soil, teeming with bacteria, fungi, and insects, acts as a massive, solar-powered processing plant. When waste is dispersed over miles, the earth breaks it down faster than pathogens can multiply. The problem only arises when you stay in one place long enough for the parasites to catch up. Why didn't this kill the average Paleolithic human? Because their lifestyle was a race they were winning by a mile. They were essentially outrunning their own shadows, leaving their biological baggage for the beetles and the rain to settle. But the boundary was about more than just distance. It was about the ritualized avoidance of the trail. Think about the physical materials. If you're an ancient human in the middle of a Siberian winter or a Saharan summer, what are you actually using for cleanup? The answer is a testament to human regional ingenuity. We have this image of the primitive human as being indifferent to hygiene, but the archaeological record suggests a much more tactile and careful approach. While leaves were the obvious choice in temperate zones, specifically soft, non-toxic varieties like those from the Morris or mulberry family, other environments required different tools. In arid regions, smooth, sun-bleached river stones were the standard. Archaeologists working at sites in the Great Basin have found stones with specific wear patterns that suggest they weren't used for grinding grain or making spearheads, but for personal cleaning. In coastal areas, bivalve shells were used. In the frozen north, handfuls of dry moss or even snow served the purpose. But even with these tools, the invisible boundary was constantly under threat from the nighttime paradox. This is where the physical danger of the ancient bathroom becomes chillingly real. If you're an ancient human, you have a hard-coded instinct to move away from camp to protect the group's health. However, the moment you step outside the light of the fire, you enter the vulnerability window. To a leopard or a hyena, a squatting human is a stationary, defenseless target with its pants literally down. This created a massive selection pressure. The humans who were too cavalier about wandering off alone at night didn't pass on their genes. Consequently, we evolved a set of social behaviors to manage the risk. We see echoes of this in modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza of Tanzania. They don't just wander off aimlessly. There are designated directions based on the wind and the terrain, and at night, the boundary shrinks. You go as far as necessary to maintain the sensory shield, but no further than the reach of a tossed ember. It was a trade-off. You risked a small amount of local contamination to avoid being eaten. Why didn't this lead to massive outbreaks of disease? Because the scent of the trail was managed by the fire's smoke, which acted as a primitive chemical barrier against both predators and the flies that carry pathogens. The fire wasn't just for cooking, it was the anchor of the invisible boundary. The smoke masked the human scent and repelled the insects that act as the primary vectors for fecal-oral transmission. But this delicate balance, this dance between the campfire and the woods, was about to be shattered by the single most catastrophic event in the history of human health: the decision to stay put. When we stopped being nomads and started being farmers, we didn't just plant seeds, we planted the seeds of our own destruction. We built the boundary out of stone and mud, and in doing so, we trapped ourselves inside with the very things we had spent 1,000,000 years running away from. If you want to see the moment the ancient bathroom became a death trap, you have to look at the ruins of Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. This Neolithic settlement, which thrived about 9,000 years ago, was one of the first experiments in high-density urban living. And it was a sanitation nightmare. Dr. Piers Mitchell, a biological anthropologist at the University of Cambridge, performed a forensic analysis on coprolites, fossilized human feces, found in the middens of Çatalhöyük. What he found was a biological horror story. The samples were teeming with the eggs of Trichuris trichura, better known as whipworm. Now, why is this a big deal? Because whipworm doesn't just appear out of thin air. It is a stationary parasite. It requires a cycle of human waste entering the soil, the eggs maturing, and then those eggs being ingested again through contaminated water or food. For a hunter-gatherer, this cycle is almost impossible to complete because they've moved to a new valley by the time the eggs are ready to infect a new host. But at Çatalhöyük, people were living on top of each other in houses with no streets, entering their homes through holes in the roofs, and dumping their waste in pits right next to where they prepared their grain. The invisible boundary had collapsed. The scent of the trail was now everywhere. The first farmers weren't the healthy, robust pioneers of progress we see in textbooks. They were stunted, anemic, and riddled with parasites. They had traded the danger of the leopard in the dark for the slow, grinding danger of the worm in the gut. This collapse of the boundary didn't just affect our physical health. It began to rewire our social structures. As settlements grew into cities, the bathroom stopped being an individual's relationship with the landscape and became a problem of engineering. We see the desperate attempts to fix what we broke in the ruins of the Indus Valley civilization. At sites like Mohenjo-Daro, dating back to 2500 BCE, we find the world's first sophisticated urban plumbing. They built brick-lined toilets with wooden seats and drainage systems that led to soak pits. They were trying to recreate the nomadic flush through sheer architectural will. They understood, perhaps intuitively, that if they couldn't move the people away from the waste, they had to move the waste away from the people. But these systems were fragile. One clogged pipe or one seasonal flood could turn a sophisticated city back into a parasite-infested swamp. The boundary was no longer a natural instinct. It was a high-maintenance machine. This leads us to a startling realization about our own bodies that has only come to light in the last decade. While we were busy building better walls and deeper sewers to keep the gross stuff out, we were accidentally killing something vital inside of us. This is the biggest reveal of the ancient bathroom story, and it reframes the entire history of human health. We spent thousands of years trying to reach a state of total sterility, believing that the cleaner we were, the better we would be. But when we look at the few remaining hunter-gatherer populations today, we find something incredible. A team of researchers led by Jeff Leach and the Sonnenberg Lab at Stanford University spent years studying the gut microbiomes of the Hadza people. They discovered that the Hadza have a microbial diversity that is nearly double that of the average Westerner. They carry species of bacteria that have been entirely wiped out in the industrialized world. Because their bathroom practices, the very things we consider primitive and dirty, keep them in constant, low-level contact with the environmental microbiome. Their hands aren't sterilized, they are covered in the beneficial bacteria of the soil and the forest. By maintaining that ancient, porous boundary with the earth, they have kept their internal ecosystems robust. In our quest to move the boundary further and further away, we've created a sterile desert inside our own guts. We've traded whipworms for autoimmune diseases, allergies, and chronic inflammation. The ancient human squatting in the woods wasn't just avoiding a predator, they were participating in a massive, ancient exchange of biological information with the planet. They were perfectly dirty. They were exposed to just enough of the world to train their immune systems without being overwhelmed by the concentrated filth of a settled city. The scent of the trail wasn't just a warning, it was an education. We often look back at the people of the Paleolithic with a kind of pity. We imagine them shivering in the dark, struggling with the basic logistics of their own bodies. But they had something we've lost: a perfect alignment between their biological needs and the environment they inhabited. They moved with the rhythm of the earth, and the earth cleaned up after them. They didn't need a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure to handle their waste because they were integrated into a system that had been recycling nutrients for billions of years. The invisible boundary was a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. It kept them safe from predators, it kept them clear of pathogens, and it kept their internal biology diverse and resilient. But as the world shifted, so did the danger. The cliffhanger of our history is that we are still living in the Catalhoyuk trap. We are still trying to solve the problems created by staying in one place. We've built incredible machines: the sewage treatment plants, the vacuum flush toilets, the antibacterial wipes, but these are just more elaborate ways of trying to outrun a shadow that we've finally caught up to. We've reached a point where our environment is so clean that our own bodies are starting to attack themselves out of boredom. We've finally pushed the boundary so far away that we can no longer see it, and in the silence of that sterile world, a new kind of threat has emerged. This brings us back to that mundane observation at the beginning: the smell of the damp earth. To an ancient human, that smell was the sign of a healthy world. It was a world where you could trust your senses to keep you alive. Today, we live in a world where our senses are constantly lied to by artificial fragrances and bleached surfaces. We've solved the problem of the leopard in the dark and the whipworm in the soil, but we've created a world where the very act of being clean is making us sick in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. So, how did ancient humans actually go to the bathroom? They did it with a level of sophistication and environmental harmony that we are only just beginning to understand. They did it by trusting a million years of evolutionary ik and by staying on the move. They weren't dirty, they were part of the cycle. And as we sit in our climate-controlled, porcelain-fitted bathrooms, we might want to ask ourselves, who is actually the one living in a trap? We've conquered this scent of the trail, but we might have lost the very thing that made us human in the process. Is it possible that our obsession with total sanitation has actually made us more fragile than a nomad squatting in a thunderstorm? As we look forward to the future of public health, the answers might not be in a new chemical or a more efficient pipe, but in the ancient soil of our ancestors. We might need to find a way to let the outside back in, to rebuild that porous boundary that once kept us whole. Because the deeper we look into the fossilized records of our past, the clearer the lesson becomes. Our ancestors didn't just survive their environment, they were shaped by it in all its messy, biological glory. The invisible boundary was never meant to be a wall, it was meant to be a filter. And by turning it into a fortress, we've cut ourselves off from the very microbes that once served as our internal guardians. We are the first generation of humans to live in a world without the scent of the trail, and the consequences are written in the rise of modern chronic illness. We've won the war against the ancient filth, but the victory feels increasingly hollow. Think about that next time you step into your pristine, tiled bathroom. You are participating in a 10,000-year-old experiment that is still very much in its early stages. You are the descendant of the people who survived the leopards and the whipworms, the ones who listened to their disgust and kept their campfire burning. You are here because they knew exactly where the boundary was. But as you look around at your sterile, white sanctuary, you have to wonder what the next 10,000 years will look like. Have we finally solved the biological puzzle, or have we just traded one set of predators for another? The answer might be waiting in the gut of a Hadza hunter, or in the dirt of a forest floor, or in the ancient code of our own DNA. We are a species defined by our relationship with our own biology, and that relationship is far more complex than a simple flush. The ancient bathroom was the world, and the world was enough. Today, the bathroom is a room, and for the first time in history, we are realizing that a room might be too small to keep us truly safe. Consider for a moment the sheer resilience of the human spirit. We have navigated the transition from the open savanna to the skyscraper, from the river stone to the bidet. We are a remarkably adaptable animal. But our biology is slow. It still thinks we are squatting by that fire, watching the shadows for eyes that glow in the dark. It still expects the scent of the trail to guide us. When we ignore those ancient signals, we do so at our own peril. The story of how we go to the bathroom is the story of how we became human, and it's a story that is still being written, one flush at a time. If you find this deep dive into the unpolite side of history as fascinating as I do, there's plenty more to explore in the intersection of biology and human behavior. It's a rabbit hole that changes the way you look at every single thing in your house, from the kitchen sink to the bedsheets. It makes you realize that civilization isn't just about art and politics, it's about how we manage the raw, biological reality of being an animal in a crowded world. How does knowing about the Catalhoyuk trap or the Hadza microbiome change the way you think about your own daily routine? Does it make you want to go wash your hands, or does it make you want to go dig in the garden? The history of sanitation is really the history of how we try to outsmart our own nature. And as we've seen, nature usually has a way of catching up. We've spent this entire time looking at how our ancestors handled their most basic need to understand how we got here. It's a journey from the forest floor to the city sewer, and it reveals a truth about our species that we often try to hide behind closed doors. We are the survivors of a million-year race against our own waste, and the finish line is still nowhere in sight. In every modern city, beneath every street, there is a labyrinth of pipes trying to do what the wind and the rain once did for free. We've built a technological marvel to replace a natural instinct, and in doing so, we've changed the very nature of what it means to be a human being. We are the settled ones, the ones who stayed, and we are still dealing with the fallout of that one ancient decision. As you go about your day, remember the invisible boundary. Remember the nomadic flush and the scent of the damp earth. We are part of a long, unbroken chain of humans who have all faced the same basic biological challenges. The only thing that has changed is the scenery. The fundamental reality of the body remains, and it is a reality that connects us to the very first person who ever wandered away from a campfire to find a quiet spot in the dark. The ancient bathroom was the ultimate teacher of boundaries, and that's a lesson we're still struggling to master in our hyper-connected, hyper-sanitized age. We've mastered the distance, but we've lost the rhythm. We've conquered the smell, but we've forgotten the reason for the ick. Perhaps the next step in our evolution isn't a better toilet, but a better understanding of the ancient, biological wisdom that we've spent the last few centuries trying to flush away. It is a sobering thought, but one that brings a strange kind of clarity. We aren't as far from the cave as we like to think. We are just better at hiding the evidence. And in that hiding, we've created a new kind of mystery that we are only just beginning to solve. The ancient bathroom is gone, but its legacy is alive in every cell of your body, in every beat of your heart, and in every breath you take. Your modern bathroom is a monument to the fact that you no longer have to worry about being eaten by a leopard in the middle of the night. It is a technological fortress designed to keep the invisible boundary intact. But every time you press that lever, you are performing a ritual that was born in the dirt, refined in the shadows, and paid for with the lives of billions of ancestors who weren't quite fast enough to outrun their own biology. The story of human waste is the most honest history we have, because it doesn't care about kings or wars or empires. It only cares about the one thing that connects every human being who has ever lived: the relentless, uncompromising demand of the living body. It is a story of survival, of instinct, and of the incredible, disgusting, beautiful dance we do with the world around us. We've come a long way from the stones and the leaves, but the trail is still there, stretching back into the deep time of our species. It's a trail that leads us to a single, inescapable conclusion about who we are and what we've built. We spent 100,000 years perfecting the art of leaving ourselves behind, only to find that we are now living in the very place where the trail ends. You think you are the one who finally escaped the dirt, but the dirt is the only thing that remembers exactly who you are.